Welcome to Verge File.
Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories. It happened so fast I almost thought I imagined it. One moment, my hand was on her shoulder. Nothing dramatic, just a simple gesture, the kind I'd done 1,000 times before. The next, she flinched like I was a stranger in a crowded street. We were in the kitchen, the morning light spilling across the counter, the smell of coffee still hanging in the air. I'd reached out without thinking, a small connection in the middle of an ordinary day. She stepped back instantly, her eyes flicking toward the sink like she had somewhere urgent to be. The move was subtle, but it landed like a punch. Not because of the rejection itself, but because of what it revealed. This wasn't about a bad mood or being busy. It was a choice. I didn't say a word. No, what's wrong? No, did I do something? I just stepped back, poured my coffee, and walked out. That was the moment the switch flipped. Up until then, I'd been the one holding the thread, initiating, bridging the gaps, keeping the connection alive even when she seemed uninterested. But now I could see it for what it was, a one-sided effort. And the thing about effort is, once you stop making it, the absence becomes louder than any argument. I spent the rest of that day moving differently. I didn't text her. I didn't ask how her afternoon was. When I got home from work, I didn't kiss her on the cheek like I usually did. I walked past her as if the air between us was empty space. She noticed. I could feel her eyes follow me when I crossed the room. She spoke in short, cautious bursts, testing the ground like she wasn't sure where it might give way. That night, I didn't sit next to her on the couch. I took the chair instead, scrolling through my phone while the TV played a show I didn't care about. The gap between us wasn't just physical, it was deliberate. She didn't reach for me. She didn't try to close the space. And that told me everything I needed to know. By morning, my decision was clear. If she wanted distance, I would give her more than she asked for. Not in anger, not as punishment, but as a statement she couldn't ignore. Because here's the truth. Touch can be denied, but presence? Presence is what makes someone feel secure. And once you remove it, you find out very quickly who can stand without it. She was about to learn. The next 72 hours were an exercise in restraint. Not the kind where you're fighting the urge to speak, but the kind where you realize silence is far more powerful than anything you could say. On Monday morning, I left before she was awake. Usually, I'd kiss her forehead or at least murmur a quiet "see you later." This time, I slipped out without a sound. When I got home that evening, she was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter like she'd been waiting. "How was work?" she asked. "Fine." I opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and walked past her. No follow-up questions, no elaboration. Just one-word answers and the sound of my footsteps on the stairs. By Tuesday, she had started probing. Casual, but careful. "You've been quiet lately," she said over dinner, eyes watching for any reaction. I nodded once, kept eating, and didn't fill the space with the usual small talk. The truth was, I'd shifted entirely into observation mode. I watched how she moved, what she chose to share, how quickly she glanced at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. I wasn't searching for evidence. I was studying the new dynamic I was building. That night, I slept on the far edge of the bed. She noticed. She shifted closer once, hesitated, then stopped. The gap stayed. By Wednesday, she was the one starting every conversation, throwing out little hooks to draw me back in. "Remember that weekend in the mountains? You know, we haven't gone to that Italian place in months." Each time, I gave her just enough to acknowledge I'd heard her, but nothing more. And here's the thing. This wasn't about playing games. It was about clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't overcompensating. I wasn't trying to fill the void. I was letting her sit in it. It was working. I could see it in the way her confidence wavered. She was used to controlling the temperature between us, turning the heat up when she wanted closeness, cooling it down when she wanted space. Now, the thermostat was in my hands, and I'd set it to cold. By Thursday morning, she lingered in the doorway as I was leaving for work. "You okay?" she asked. I met her eyes for a second, then looked past her. "I'm fine." No smile, no reassurance. Just the truth, at least my version of it. Because the reality was, I wasn't withdrawing to punish her. I was withdrawing to see what happened when I stopped carrying the weight of the connection. And if she thought the rejection of my touch was the line I wouldn't cross, she was about to learn that my absence could go much further. and it had only just begun. By Friday, the silence between us had grown its own gravity. It pulled at her in ways I could see but didn't acknowledge. Her questions became sharper, her glances longer, as if she was trying to read something in my expression that wasn't there anymore. That morning, I made a decision. If removing my touch had unsettled her, and removing my presence had made her uneasy, then the next step would shake the ground entirely. I didn't tell her I was leaving town. I just packed a small bag before she woke up, slid it into my trunk, and drove off without a word. I turned my phone off halfway down the highway. No messages, no calls, no social media. For 2 days, I disappeared from her radar completely. While she was pacing our house, wondering where I was sitting on a quiet porch 2 hours away, drinking coffee and listening to the rain hit the roof. I didn't check my phone. I didn't think about what she was doing. I thought about how light it felt to have no obligations to explain myself. By Saturday evening, I powered my phone back on. The screen lit up with a flood of missed calls and unread messages. Where are you? Are you okay? This isn't funny. I read them all in silence, then set the phone back down without replying. When I finally drove home late Sunday night, the house lights were still on. She was waiting by the front window. I parked, took my time getting my things, and walked inside like I'd just come back from the store. "Where have you been?" she demanded, her voice a mix of anger and relief. "Away," I said, hanging up my jacket. "You didn't think to tell me?" I met her eyes for a moment, calm and steady. No, there was nothing else to explain. I wasn't her to-do list to be managed. I wasn't her constant, ready to be summoned at will. I had removed myself from that role entirely. That night, she barely slept. I could hear her shifting, sitting up, getting out of bed and back in again. The control she had taken for granted was slipping fast, and she didn't know how to grab it back. For me, it was simple. She had rejected my touch, so I'd taken away something far more valuable, my availability. And once someone learns they no longer have that, panic isn't far behind. She was already on the edge. I was just deciding how far I wanted her to fall. By Monday morning, she was trying to play it cool. The sharp tone from the night before had softened into something more measured, almost careful. She made breakfast, poured me coffee, asked how I'd slept. I gave her short answers and kept my eyes on the paper. She wasn't used to this version of me, the one who didn't rise to bait, didn't chase, didn't soothe. My silence had become a mirror, and I could see her flinch every time she caught her own reflection in it. That evening, she hovered near the kitchen doorway as I made myself dinner. "We should talk," she said. "About what?" I asked without looking up from the pan. "About us." "I'm listening." But she didn't have anything solid to say. Just vague lines about feeling off lately and wondering why I'd been so distant. I let her talk until the words started looping back on themselves. Then I said, "I'm just matching your energy." Her face froze for a second, then smoothed over. She laughed lightly, like it was a joke, but her hands were gripping the counter tighter than they should have. The truth was, she had noticed the shift long before she admitted it. The difference now was that she couldn't predict my next move, and uncertainty is a form of power when you know how to hold it. Midweek, I started spending more evenings out. Not late, not suspicious, just long enough for her to notice the empty house when she expected me home. I'd come back to find her in the living room, pretending to watch TV, but clearly listening for the sound of my keys in the door. When I did walk in, I didn't explain where I'd been. Sometimes I didn't even mention I'd been out. That omission was deliberate. It left her with space to imagine, and the mind always fills silence with its own worst possibilities. By Thursday, her small talk was gone. She was blunt now. "Are you seeing someone else?" I didn't even pause. "No, I'm just not here the way I used to be." The way her eyes narrowed told me she understood exactly what I meant. She was losing control, but not in a way she could call me out for. There was no fight, no scandal, just a steady erosion of the certainty she'd once had about her place in my life. And the most dangerous part for her? I wasn't asking for it back. She had pushed me to the edge without realizing I'd already stepped off, and now she was the one standing alone on the cliff, wondering if I'd ever come back to pull her to safety. By Friday, the shift was undeniable. She was no longer just reacting, she was pursuing. It started with little gestures. A text in the middle of the day, asking what I wanted for dinner. A picture of something she'd seen that reminded her of us. Things she hadn't done in months, maybe years. I gave polite, minimal replies. Nothing rude, nothing warm. Just enough to acknowledge receipt. And with each non-committal response, I could feel her leaning in harder. That night, she suggested we go out. Just the two of us. Like we used to. I agreed without hesitation, but not for the reason she thought. I wanted to see what she would do when the environment shifted, when the setting was familiar, but I wasn't. We ended up at a small restaurant we'd been to dozens of times. She ordered my usual without asking, smiled across the table, tried to pull me into nostalgia. I stayed present, but detached. I listened more than I spoke, letting her fill the silences. Halfway through the meal, she reached across the table and touched my hand. It wasn't casual. It was intentional, the kind of touch meant to bridge a gap. I didn't pull away, but I didn't close my hand over hers either. She noticed. Her smile faltered for just a second before she pushed forward with another story, another laugh. On the drive home, she played songs from when we first started dating, watching me out of the corner of her eye to see if I'd react. I didn't. The music washed over me without pulling me back to where she wanted. When we got home, she lingered near me, clearly waiting for something, an invitation, a sign that the evening had worked. Instead, I told her I was tired and went upstairs. The next morning, she was already up, making breakfast again. She kept glancing toward the stairs every time she heard movement, like she was waiting for me to join her. When I did, she lit up in a way that told me she'd been rehearsing her smile. I ate in silence, thanked her, and left for the day without saying where I was going. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just unsettled anymore. She was chasing, trying to re-establish the connection she'd once controlled so easily. But the thing about chasing is, it only works if the person you're after wants to be caught. And I had no intention of letting her catch me again. By midweek, the balance had shifted completely. The woman who once held all the leverage was now navigating blind, trying to find her way back to the dynamic she'd lost. Every move she made seemed to be a test, an invitation to play the old game. But I wasn't stepping onto that board again. On Wednesday, I came home to find she'd cleaned the entire house. Candles lit, soft music playing, dinner already waiting. She greeted me at the door with a smile that looked practiced in the mirror. I thought we could have a nice night, she said. Looks nice, I replied, hanging my jacket, my tone neutral. We ate, but the atmosphere wasn't what she'd hoped for. She tried to spark conversation, steering toward light, happy topics. I let her talk, offering short answers, never quite matching her energy. The harder she tried to pull me into warmth, the colder my stillness felt. After dinner, she suggested we watch something together. I agreed, but I sat at the opposite end of the couch. She shifted closer, inch by inch, until she was just within reach. I stayed still, eyes on the screen. She didn't understand that it wasn't about ignoring her. It was about showing her that access to me was no longer automatic. Every moment she reached, and found nothing in return, was another crack in her control. By Thursday, she was restless. I caught her glancing at my phone more than once when she thought I wasn't looking. She lingered in the hallway when I took calls, listening for any hint of where my attention might be going. That evening, she finally confronted me. "You've been different," she said, the words tight. "I have," I answered plainly. "Why?" I shrugged. Maybe I just stopped trying harder than the other person in the room. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't argue, didn't deny it. She just turned away, but I could see the sting in her posture. The rest of the night passed in a tense quiet. She didn't hover. She didn't try to touch me. But I knew it wasn't because she'd given up. It was because she was trying to figure out a new strategy. What she didn't realize was that this wasn't a phase she could wait out. This was the new reality. She had taken my effort for granted, and once it was gone, so was her control. And I had no interest in giving either back. By the weekend, it wasn't just between us anymore. Other people were starting to notice. Not because I was broadcasting it. If anything, my silence made it louder, but because the shift was visible in ways neither of us could hide. Saturday night, we attended a small gathering at a friend's place. Normally, she'd be glued to my side, laughing, introducing me to people, keeping up appearances. This time, I kept my distance. I spoke with friends, joined conversations without her, let her see me perfectly comfortable on my own. At one point, A mutual friend glanced between us and asked quietly, "Everything good with you too?" I just smiled and said, "Everything's fine," then shifted the topic. But the look lingered on their face. She noticed that too. Later in the evening, I caught her watching me from across the room. Not with affection, but with calculation, like she was trying to read a code she used to know by heart. I stayed in my circle of conversation, never giving her the signal to join. On the drive home, the silence was heavier than usual. She didn't reach for the radio, didn't try to fill the air. Sunday morning, her sister dropped by unexpectedly. As we all sat in the kitchen, her sister asked how things were going. I gave polite, neutral answers, but I could feel the shift in tone from both of them. The small tension in her sister's voice told me she'd noticed something too. When her sister left, she didn't say a word. She just stood at the sink, rinsing a cup that didn't need rinsing. I walked past her, grabbed my keys, and told her I'd be out for a while. No explanation, no timeline. I spent the afternoon at a coffee shop, reading and watching the rain. When I returned home hours later, she was in the living room, the TV on but muted. "You didn't answer my texts," she said. "I didn't see them," I replied simply. She stared at me, searching for a crack in my composure, something to grip. There was nothing. The truth was, the more others noticed, the more it cornered her. She wasn't just losing her grip on me. She was losing the image she'd curated for everyone else. And for someone like her, that kind of exposure cuts deeper than any argument ever could. I didn't need to say a word. The outside world was starting to do the work for me. By Monday night, she had reached her breaking point. I could see it in the way she paced the living room, her arms crossed tight, her jaw set. She wasn't waiting for a moment to talk anymore. She was going to force it. When I walked in, she didn't even wait for me to take off my jacket. "We need to talk now," she said. I sat down calmly. "Go ahead." Her words came fast, sharp, like she'd been rehearsing them. She accused me of shutting her out, of changing, of making her feel like she didn't matter. She brought up the past weeks, the silence, the distance, the nights I disappeared without explanation. I let her speak without interrupting. I kept my face neutral, my breathing steady. When she finally paused, waiting for me to respond, I just said, "You noticed." She blinked, thrown off. "Of course I noticed. What is going on with you?" I leaned back in my chair. I stopped putting in more effort than I was getting back. "That's it." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She was expecting a fight, a confession, maybe even an apology. What she got was something far worse for her, a calm truth she couldn't twist. She tried to regain control. "So this is about punishing me?" "No, this is about matching energy." The quiet that followed was heavier than the argument she wanted to have. She sat down across from me, her eyes searching for any sign of weakness. But I'd already moved beyond the point of needing her to understand. "I don't know who you are right now," she said finally. "I do," I answered. "I'm the version of myself I should have been all along." The words hit her harder than if I'd yelled. She turned away, blinking fast, then stood and walked into the kitchen without another word. I didn't follow. I didn't console. I let her sit in the silence she'd once been so comfortable giving me. That night, she didn't come to bed until hours later. When she did, she stayed on her side, not touching me. I fell asleep easily, knowing that she'd expected confrontation to pull me back into her orbit, and instead, it had pushed me even further away. She had finally confronted me, and in doing so, she'd realized the worst truth of all. She no longer had the power to decide how close I stood. By the end of that week, the strain had started to show in every part of her life. She was quieter on the phone with friends. I overheard her turning down invitations she normally would have jumped at. Her social media, once a constant stream of curated perfection, had gone still. One night, I walked past the bathroom and caught a glimpse of her in the mirror, shoulders hunched, eyes tired, holding her phone like it might deliver something to steady her. But the truth was, what she needed couldn't come through a screen. She had always been able to balance two worlds, the one she lived in with me, and the one she projected to everyone else. But now, both were slipping. The gap between them had closed, and for the first time, they looked the same, unsteady, uncertain. Her friends began to notice the change. I could see it in their glances when we were out, in the way conversation stalled when she walked away. People weren't asking if something was wrong anymore. They were asking how bad it was. She tried to pull me back in that Friday night, cooking my favorite meal and dressing like she used to when she wanted my attention. I thanked her, ate, and then got up to take a call in the other room. When I returned, the table was cleared, her plate untouched. Later, she came into the bedroom and sat at the edge of the bed. "I feel like I'm losing you," she said quietly. I didn't answer right away. I let the words hang there, heavy, before I finally said, "You're not losing me. You already lost me. You just didn't notice when it happened." She flinched like the air had been knocked out of her. No argument, no deflection, just silence. That weekend, she stopped trying, not out of acceptance, but because she didn't know where to start anymore. Her movements around the house became slow, distracted. She stayed up late in the living room, scrolling endlessly through her phone, as if searching for proof that this wasn't real. But it was real, and I didn't have to do anything to prove it. Her collapse wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, creeping, and inevitable. And the worst part for her was that it wasn't me who had pushed her over the edge. I'd simply stepped aside and let her walk there on her own. By the following Tuesday, the house felt different. Not because anything in it had changed, but because I had. Every decision I'd made over the last few weeks had led here, to the quiet moment where I knew I was done. That morning, I woke early, before she stirred. I packed a single duffel bag with the things that actually mattered to me. Clothes, documents, a few personal items. I left the rest. This wasn't about taking everything. It was about taking only what I needed to walk away. I moved through the house without hurry. There was no chaos, no argument, no pleading. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my footsteps on the hardwood. She woke as I was zipping my bag. Her voice was groggy. "Where are you going?" I looked at her for a long second. "I'm going where I'm respected." Her eyes widened. "So that's it?" "That's it." I didn't explain further. I didn't remind her of the months of distance, the small rejections, the way she treated my presence like a guarantee. Those were details for her to replay in her own head, louder in silence than they'd ever be if I said them out loud. I carried my bag to the door. She followed but didn't step outside. I could feel her eyes on me as I walked to the car, started the engine, and pulled away without looking back. There was no dramatic soundtrack, no slamming doors. Just the steady rhythm of tires on asphalt and the clean, unshakable calm that comes from knowing you've acted on your own terms. I didn't disappear. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't valued. And in the weeks that followed, I learned something she never expected me to. Freedom doesn't always come with celebration. Sometimes it comes in the form of a quiet morning, a packed bag, and a door you close behind you without hesitation. I rebuilt my days piece by piece. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years. I filled my time with things I'd once put aside for her. I laughed more, slept better, and found that my reflection looked different, steadier, stronger, sharper. She reached out once, weeks later. I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because my chapter in her story was over and she no longer had a place in mine. Walking away wasn't the end for me. It was the start. And for her, it was the silence she'd never be able to fill. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.